On June 24, 2010, 57-year-old Lee Bentley Farkas makes bond and walks out of a Florida jail. The once high-flying mortgage mogul is charged with engineering a series of massive frauds that have bankrupted his own company. For more than a decade, Farkas peddled fake mortgages and looted his company for tens of millions of dollars, leaving thousands of innocent homeowners to live mortgage nightmares. Jason Moore worked with Lee Farkas for 7 years.
He always said, we have to make as much money as possible right now, because this will not last forever.
Houses aren't selling, credit is scarce, and risky home loans have led to a mounting list of bankrupt mortgage companies. Reporter Nick Timmerose has covered Farkas' story for the Wall Street Journal.
He was on trial because he stole from a bank, he stole from investors. He did things that were so blatantly wrong. You cross a red line at a certain point.
Charged with 16 counts of wire, banking, and securities fraud, Farkas faces a sentence of up to 385 years. Lee Farkas' story begins in Albuquerque, New Mexico. His sister, Terry Huber, remembers a responsible brother consumed with being respected and successful.
He was very smart as a child and always talking about business.
When his father dies, Farkas drops out of college and at 21 takes a crack at running the family insurance company.
He didn't think school was that important, and he felt he had to come back and take over my dad's business.
The family business flounders. It seems insurance isn't young Lee's forte. In the late 70s, Farkas sells the business and goes in search of his fortune.
Farkas kind of rambled from place to place. It wasn't really clear what his great ambition was going to be in life.
By the mid-1980s, Farkas lands in Ocala, Florida, a sleepy town speckled with horse farms. Gerald Ergel is the former mayor of Ocala.
Ocala is known as the horse capital of the world. The people here are some of the nicest, most congenial people that you'll ever meet.
In largely evangelical, conservative Ocala, Lee lives as an openly gay man. But residents seem kind and trusting to this businessman.
He knew that there was a really large senior population who were looking to build their dream homes.
Farkas thinks it's the perfect place to make a killing. He launches a construction company with his life partner Coda Robertson backing the money.
At first it did pretty well, but he started to clash with old Ocalians, the old guard here. And he was the new kid in town. He was different, he was bold, he was gay, and didn't fit the typical mold.
In sunny Ocala, residents accuse Farkas of shady business practices. Farkas soon finds he's running a failing business. Again. In late 1989, the company folds.
He racked up a ton of bills. He had judgments against him left and right. He was known as a crook.
But Farkas is about to find his calling. In 1991, he snaps up a little mortgage company called Taylor, Bean & Whitaker, or TBW, for $75,000.
He was flat broke. He actually got the money to buy the company from his partner's mother.
Farkas has no formal training in finance, but he's now running his own mortgage company. In a good month, the business closes 40 loans, but Farkas thinks he can do better.
He could leverage his quick-talking skills, his ability to think quickly on his feet.
By the late 90s, the U.S. housing market is growing rapidly, and so is the internet.
He was like a financial prophet. He predicted the whole mortgage industry was about to be broken wide open because of the internet. And he understood that those who mastered technology would be ahead of the curve when it came to originating loans.
You're selling people on loan products. Farkas had that, and he was able to make a very successful business out of it.
Farkas' salesmanship kicks into high gear. He expands TBW, opening 12 branches in 5 states. It was then that Farkas meets 28-year-old Cambridge University graduate Jason Moore at a Florida barbecue and hires him to spearhead internet innovations.
He offered me a six-figure salary like he was handing me a pencil. I wasn't looking for a job, I wasn't qualified, but I took it.
By December 2000, TBW is processing more than 6,000 mortgages a year. And Farkas is acquiring a taste for the finer things in life. He stockpiles classic cars, a 65 Shelby Cobra, a Model A Woody, a handful of investment homes and party pads from Key West to Maine. He also invests heavily in his adopted hometown, scooping up real estate and converting dilapidated buildings into TBW offices. Locals welcome him as a vital employer.
Lee's goal was to make Taylor Bean & Whitaker the largest mortgage company in the world. The jobs that they created here, that was a huge asset.
In the early 2000s, the housing market in the United States explodes.
Taylor Bean & Whitaker grew and grew and grew because this was a great time to be in the business. These were the go-go years of consumer mortgage lending.
Credit is cheap. Regulations are loose, and Lee Farkas is finally successful and respected.
He said, you know what, now is my time. I see an industry that I can sink my teeth into, and I'm going for it.
TBW is independent, a fact Farkas is fiercely proud of.
They would originate mortgages. They would get loans from other people, from banks and from other credit facilities. They would take those loans and sell them to other investors.
But being independent, TBW lacks the financial resources of big commercial banks and can't hold large amounts of loans on the books.
Taylor Bean Whitaker wasn't a bank, so they relied on short-term funding.
To secure TBW's loan money, Farkas decides to rely on Colonial Bank, one of the largest banks in the Southeast. An old financial acquaintance, Kathy Kissick, is vice president at Colonial's Orlando-based mortgage lending division. Farkas's former defense attorney, Bruce Rogo, knows the history between Kissick and Farkas.
Lee became the biggest customer of that division at Colonial Bank. And so he would call upon her to fund mortgages.
Farkas has dealt with Kathy Kissick long enough to know she's easy to control. With Colonial's support, TBW becomes one of the fastest growing mortgage companies in America.
It left many individuals wondering, how could something happen so quickly?
Up next on American Greed, Lee Farkas is manufacturing loans and shifting funds to pump up TBW's profits.
It was a combination of hubris and insanity that left most of us shocked.
By 2002, Lee Farkas's charm and the team of talented executives he surrounds himself with have allowed him to grow Taylor Bean & Whitaker into a mortgage industry force. Farkas wants to crush his competition, and now he's on his way.
He had the forethought to go to mom-and-pop institutions across the country and give them the ability to get online approvals instantly in a matter of seconds. It was something that no other mortgage lender was doing. It made Lee an instant banking rock star.
Farkas sells technology tools to smaller banks, and they bring their business to TBW. He has also impressed Fannie Mae, the government-backed agency that issues almost half of all mortgage-backed securities. They like his online platform and become TBW's biggest client.
How could this maverick transform a company that was based in a small town in the sleepy South to such a level? It was unparalleled in the mortgage industry.
But behind the scenes, Farkas has big problems brewing. As an independent mortgage company, TBW still needs short-term funds. Colonial Bank supplies that money. And two of TBW's accounts at Colonial Bank are overdrawn. The deficit is $10 million at first, then quickly jumps to $100 million. While Farkas is aware of the overdraft, only a few of his top executives are clued in. Ray Bowman is one of those few. He quietly starts poring through bank records. What Bowman discovers is shocking. The company isn't charging high enough fees on the mortgage loans they're making. And TBW is running in the red on everything from operating expenses to payroll.
The entire operation, really from the beginning, was smoke and mirrors. Because Lee controlled virtually every aspect of the company, none of us individually fully understood what was going on until it was too late.
But Bowman is loyal. He caves in to the pressure from Farkas, and his secrets stay in-house.
Lee simply said, "You're not going to do anything. I refuse to fix the situation, and you're not going to do anything." Ray was defeated. He, in the end, felt powerless to act.
If word gets out, Farkas's business could go under, or worse, he could go to jail. But he has a backup plan. Longtime business associate Kathy Kissick. Farkas tells Kissick he needs a favor. Kissick is willing to help. After all, TBW is her biggest client. She agrees to temporarily cover the shortfall until the missing money is replaced.
The banks do overdraft reports that Kathy Kissick would move money from different accounts to cover up the overdrafts.
Kissick and Farkas call the cover-up operation sweeping. At the end of each day, Kissick and her underling in Orlando sweep money from TBW's profitable accounts into TBW's master account. Bank records get processed overnight. In the morning, Colonial executives see a rosy picture of TBW's balances. Nobody outside Farkas's chosen circle knows that TBW is overdrawn by more than $100 million.
I think Kathy Kissick had confidence in Lee and believed that Lee could make all of this work. And that's why she continued working with him and helping him and supporting him.
For now, the cover-up works, and no one is asking any questions. Farkas doesn't seem worried in the least that he'll be caught. Tampa Bay Times business columnist Robert Trigot isn't surprised by Farkas's demeanor.
There is a naivete that, gee, if I did something wrong, I'll get my hand slapped and we will just carry on.
He's spending weekends in the sunshine, hobnobbing in style, and hiring eager workers for new TBW positions.
People were just absolutely almost standing in line to go to work at Taylor, Bean & Whitaker.
Part of the pull of Lee Farkas is the incredible charm and genuine emotion that he exuded. I mean, he had the charisma of a Gatsby.
But for all his good guy popularity, Farkas is also gaining a reputation as a bullying hothead.
He had a habit of publicly bawling out colleagues, and he once screamed at his chief operating officer on a conference call, "What are you, stupid?" He once fired his sister by email. He rehired her back a short time later.
Those of us on the inside came to refer to those events as being Farkist. It was a type of abuse that could only be described as the worst kind of domestic dysfunction.
In 2002, it seems Farkas's troubles are multiplying. As the sweeping scheme with Colonial expands, he lands in hot water with Fannie Mae, his crown jewel client.
Fannie Mae discovered that some of the loans that were coming to them were not up to snuff and in some cases completely bogus.
TBW's manufactured loans are clearly illegal. But Farkas has a talent for smooth talking his way out of trouble. He tells Fannie Mae that subordinates placed loans that were never meant to be sold into groups that were sent to Fannie. It's all been just a big mistake.
Fannie Mae, the largest buyer of mortgages in the U.S., says, "We're not going to buy mortgages from you anymore," and that's usually a scarlet letter.
Fannie Mae cuts ties with TBW. Fortunately for Farkas, they do it quietly.
The problem was they didn't tell anybody else about it. The result was Taylor Bean shifted gears and went to other government-sponsored enterprises and essentially continued their bogus operation with the stamp of approval of these government entities for many years.
I negotiated a very smooth transition between Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. I had to publicly state things that I knew not to be true. And in Lee's eyes, he saw that as a point of strength.
For their silence and loyalty, Farkas makes Jason Moore his chief operating officer, and he promotes Ray Bowman to president.
From that point onward, he operated with a sense of unbridled power.
Meanwhile, TBW is hemorrhaging money. The sweeping scheme has become too time-consuming and risky. So by the end of 2003, Kathy Kissick comes up with a new plan. She calls it Plan B. She and colonial underlings move TBW's debt into a special account called Colby to secretly signify fake loans.
Kathy would say, send me more mortgages. And Lee would say to his people, find mortgages that you can send there.
There was not a borrower, there was not a property attached to a loan, but TBW needed to create a fake loan so that Colonial Bank would give us money so that we could then fund real loans coming in the door.
Laundering TBW's fake mortgage loans through Colonial is a temporary fix. But until Farkas can come up with $100 million, the cover-up becomes a continuous, vicious cycle. In emails to Kathy Kissick, Farkas assures her someday they'll be laughing about the situation on a beach. Kissick's half-joking response, I hope it's not from prison. In 2005, Farkas moves most of the sweeping and Plan B loans over to Colonial's Assignment of Trade, or AOT accounts, where they're bundled into pools. These bundled pools of loans give Farkas the perfect cover to shift TBW's fake loan production into overdrive.
He would go back to loans he had originated 10 years prior, change a few of the details. It surprised him how easy it was. And when he discovered that the trail couldn't easily be traced, he just kept going back year after year after year and selling them to multiple investors.
Up next, Lee Farkas hatches a new scheme to swindle billions more from some of the richest banks in the world.
He was robbing a bank by using a pencil. It plays to the arrogance of Lee Farkas. I mean, clearly this was a smart guy.
In 2005, Colonial Bank executive Kathy Kissick is getting nervous. She has been inventing or shuffling worthless mortgages to help Lee Farkas hide his losses for more than 2 years. Now, more than anything, Kissick desperately wants out. If the fraud is uncovered, Kissick could lose her job or face jail time. But Farkas's unpredictable mind games are powerful. Kissick can't stand up for herself long enough or loud enough to stop the bleeding.
Lee Farkas would make people cry, the way that he dealt with Kathy, yelling at her one day, trying to be nice to her the next day, to try to get her to keep his business afloat, even if it was through, illegal methods.
The stakes are high for Farkas. On the books, TBW's profits are soaring. But huge operating expenses and undercharging for mortgages are burying the company in debt. It seems Farkas, the brilliant mortgage visionary, hasn't paid attention to dollars and cents details. Ever.
I don't think Lee Farkas should be penalized for bad business decisions. I think he should be penalized for blatant fraud.
Farkas hasn't paid Kissick off to cover for his schemes. He's made her a psychological hostage.
She was scared. She was just plain frightened of what had occurred.
Meanwhile, Lee Farkas presents his company as a paradigm of ethical virtue. As attorney Paul Singerman explains, posters and hotline numbers demand employees to report mortgage fraud.
My favorite is the Forrest Gump knockoff. All the while, the biggest perpetrator of that fraud was Mr. Farkas.
TBW's overdrafts at Colonial keep deepening by the day. Farkas owes more than $500 million. With Kissick keeping quiet, Farkas still has Colonial as his major cash cow. But he needs more money, and he needs it fast.
Lee hatched this idea to approach big-time investors. They would give TBW $500 million if TBW would securitize that $500 million with its own collateral.
So in January 2005, Farkas creates a new business, Ocala Funding, LLC.
Ocala Funding has no employees. It's wholly owned by Taylor Bean, and it's a short-term credit facility. It's asset-backed commercial paper.
Companies use commercial paper to raise money. Based on the value of a company's collateral or assets, investors will loan money. Big-name banks, including Deutsche Bank and BNP Paribas, put in close to $2 billion to Ocala Funding. Colonial executives think they have more than $500 million in loans.
That loan collateral was pure fiction. It didn't exist. Ocala Funding was Lee's and TBW's personal piggy bank. It was a scheme of epic proportions.
Farkas says the investor money will allow TBW to offer more home loans to everyday people. Some of TBW's home loans are authentic, but more are fabricated with made-up addresses, altered dates, or dollar amounts. Most of them are worthless, but hard to track.
Ocala Funding should have had $1,750,000 or more in mortgages, and it had almost none.
By 2006, Jason Moore resigns from his position as Chief Operating Officer, but stays at TBW in a less prominent role as a not-for-profit consultant outside the circle of secrets.
It just became so apparent that he had become someone that I could not rescue, that I really chose to save myself.
Next on American Greed, TBW is tanking fast, but Lee Farkas has one more play, this time cheating to cash in on bank bailouts.
Regulators and investigators begin to say, well, wait a minute, what's happening here? Are these really your loans? Where is this funding coming from?
In 2006, Taylor, Bean & Whitaker is one of America's busiest mortgage lenders. The company has expanded to more than 24 branches in 12 states. Chairman Lee Farkas has plans to expand globally, but the bulk of TBW's home loans are valueless. That doesn't stop Farkas from siphoning millions from his own company.
He essentially would run all of his personal expenses through the company. He simply used that money to fund whatever he wanted.
Jason Moore can't take the fraud or Farkas's lies any longer. In January of 2007, Moore resigns and walks away with nothing from TBW.
I could no longer turn a blind eye. I knew that if I didn't leave, it would consume me.
By 2007, housing sales are drying up and prices are plummeting. Yet even with ominous signs of a tanking economy, TBW seems immune. The company employs more than 2,500 from coast to coast. And in 2008, Farkas expands into shining new corporate headquarters, built for $26 million.
When somebody walks into this building, the first thing they always say is, wow, this is an amazing building.
It was really a showpiece, something the community was proud of.
Tracy Dush and her two children, Richard and Emily, all land jobs with TBW. And like most employees, they are impressed with the luxurious new office space, complete with onyx walls, a gourmet executive dining room, millions in wall decor, and a palatial entryway with gel-infused floors.
I loved going to work every day. I worked with great people. My kids would tell you the same thing. It felt like family.
We were making good money. It was stressful. You know, it was very high demand, very high pressure. but like I said, we had a lot of fun.
As executive chef assistant, Emily Dush witnesses firsthand how Farkas spares no expense.
We would get caviar. It was like $150 for a jar. That was tiny. I got to cook the pumpkin swordfish, del sol, ox, eel, duck, and that was how it was every day.
In Ocala, Farkas earns a reputation as a philanthropist, donating millions to local causes.
He had a heart for doing things for the community. Marion Theater was a prime example.
Farkas stepped in, $1.23 million put into the theater and brought it back to its original state.
The problem is the gifts being made were other people's money, innocent people's money, not Mr. Farkas's money.
Farkas has masterfully kept his crimes at TBW clandestine, but the reality of his business is about to come to light. In early 2009, Colonial Bank is reeling from bad investments and the collapse of the housing market. But there's a lifeline. The bank could score $533 million from the government's Troubled Asset Relief Program, or TARP.
The Florida housing market was a serious mess. Colonial began to suffer. Financially, it needed to raise capital.
If Colonial goes under, TBW is dead in the water. Everything has got to come to light. If TBW goes under, they're going to blow the whistle on Colonial Bank. They're in bed together in a much deeper way than they had been in the past.
Colonial goes to the Treasury and says, we'd like to sign up for TARP, please. And Treasury says, first you need to raise $300 million on your own. They want to see that Colonial can make it before the government's going to put in even more money.
Farkas sets the wheels in motion for yet another con.
Lee's reputation as an escape artist preceded him all his life. He had escaped out of one sticky situation after another.
Farkas pledges to raise $150 million for Colonial and to help get the rest, even though his own company is drowning.
If he could inject or appear to inject hundreds of million dollars into Colonial Bank, this would buy time.
Lee Farkas claims that he has different investors that are part of this $300 million investment, and Lee Farkas has to fool people into thinking that they've actually raised the money.
As part of the TARP vetting process, Colonial also has to open its books to government regulators. It should be routine, but right away, TARP agents can tell something is off. Way off. The majority of Colonial's mortgage lending is devoted only to one company, Taylor, Bean, and Whitaker. And TBW's accountant, Deloitte & Touche, who has given TBW glowing audit reports since 2002, suddenly won't sign off on its latest reports. Investigators sift through thousands of documents, piecing together a complicated web of deceit. The trail leads to Colonial Bank employees and Kathy Kissick.
All lines led back to TBW loans. There was no way of concealing what had happened.
When American Greed returns, the feds have Lee Farkas right where they want him, and he has no idea.
It's only going to be a matter of time before they figure things out.
I don't think so.
In 2009, TARP investigators are planning their next move. They know Lee Farkas's attempt to transfer millions to Colonial Bank is a reckless last-ditch effort to get $553 million more in TARP bailout funds. His falsified transactions are computer-generated and easily traceable.
Once it was eventually discovered that the $300 million was bogus money, that disqualified Colonial Bank to receive a federal bailout.
The government rejects Colonial Bank's request for TARP money. Like any expert showman knows, appearances are everything. Farkas may be panicked, but he doubles down on his spending. His Ocala home, like his office, is one of the finest in town.
It was big and gorgeous I mean, the minute you drove up and met the gate, you knew it was going to be like you were on MTV Cribs.
He has a seaplane, a $28 million corporate jet with a private hangar, and is expanding his empire outside of the mortgage world.
Lee dumped countless millions into a local gym here in Ocala, several high-end restaurants. His outside investments were worth in excess of $20 million. And those funds were taken from corporate funds.
And he has developed a penchant for carousing.
He opened a string of gay bars in Atlanta. He very quickly became known as the gay entrepreneur.
To those who've known him for years, Farkas's exploits in and beyond the boardroom are becoming alarmingly reckless.
He left his partner of 35 years for someone much younger. He even bought a very famous strip club in Atlanta. Many of the strippers were then hired by TBW to work as account executives.
Observers find his wild swings even more disturbing than the unpredictable Farkas of old.
It was almost as if Lee was telling them, I'm in control of this situation. There was a parallel between his personal life and the kinds of schemes that he was hatching professionally. He felt that he was untouchable.
Farkas is making millions at TBW and tapping millions more. Yet the revenue stream is all ill-gotten gains from fake loans and cooked books.
Farkas looted to the extent of tens of millions of dollars.
TARP investigators, who began with a routine inquiry, find more evidence of wire and securities fraud by the day. They ask their FBI partners to turn up the heat. By the summer of 2009, the feds have convinced several of Farkas's cohorts to flip and become FBI informants. With home and cell phone lines tapped, agents listen into a phone call between Farkas and TBW's Ocala funding president, Desiree Brown.
How are you?
I'm a mess. I got home last night and there's business cards from FBI agents on my door.
You're not obligated to talk to them.
It's only going to be a matter of time before they figure things out.
I don't think so.
If anybody took the time to look through the emails, they would eventually figure it out, Lee.
On August 3rd, federal agents raid Colonial Bank's Orlando office and Taylor Bean and Whitaker headquarters. It's the beginning of the end. 2 days after the raid, Tracy Dush and more than 2,000 other TBW employees are greeted with a mass email.
It said, basically, due to circumstances beyond our control, this is going to be your last day. We're shutting down permanently. I'm telling you, people were crying. They were distraught. We had literally that afternoon, this was 2 o'clock, to get our stuff packed and leave.
TBW files for bankruptcy on August 24th. 1 day later, Colonial Bank, with $26 billion in assets, goes under. It's the 6th largest bank failure in U.S. history. The FDIC steps in to pick up the pieces. Back in Ocala, grim reality replaces shock.
TBW had a huge presence in our community, and the day that the Fed shut it down, it felt like a gut punch. It had tremendous ripple effects.
Everyone in Ocala knows someone out of work because of Lee Farkas. In the Dush family, Tracy and her 2 children go into survival mode.
All of a sudden, 3 of us are out of work, and money gets tight really quick.
We were already in a bad economy. Florida was one of the worst states in the United States at that time, so it was out of the frying pan into the fire,
People would go, is there anything I can do for you? Yeah, you can pray. I don't know if I'm going to have food tomorrow. I need something, a small job, a babysitting gig. I'll clean your house. Anything.
TBW's fallout has left a wake of foreclosure nightmares for homeowners around the country.
We still get calls fairly often from people who took out a mortgage, and that mortgage ended up at Taylor Bean and was somehow eventually packaged up and into securities. They have no idea what is the status of their mortgage.
Like Sandy Smith in Stephenville, Texas, who is fighting to keep the 4-bedroom home she bought in 2007.
We found out later that Taylor Bean and Whitaker didn't really own our mortgage like we were told they did.
For months, Smith promptly mailed her mortgage payment to TBW. Now, she doesn't know where her money went.
All of a sudden, you get a foreclosure notice, and you're wondering, why am I getting a foreclosure notice? We've been making payments.
Smith can't get a straight answer on who cashed her mortgage checks. She knows that her mortgage note was packaged into securities, then sold to multiple banks. And she is not alone. TBW did the same thing to more than 500,000 other homeowners.
As these loans are being sold to different entities, homeowners are getting letters from multiple institutions saying, this is my loan. No, this is my loan. No, it's my loan.
How can all of these people want my money all at the same time?
For Smith, who has fought 4 foreclosures and even potential eviction from her home, Farkas's downfall means little. She wants the laws to change.
You're not supposed to lose your house, and you've done everything that you're supposed to do. Who's going to enforce those laws? Do we see the justice system as working? No, absolutely not.
Up next, prosecutors get ready to hammer TBW's chairman as Lee Farkas comes face to face with his victims in court.
There were an awful lot of people who were so angry. They had had a good job, and now it just went up in smoke. A lot of people would still like to nail his hide to the wall.
On June 15, 2010, federal prosecutors in Alexandria, Virginia, indict Lee Farkas after building their case for more than a year. He's charged with 16 counts of conspiracy to commit bank fraud, wire fraud, and securities fraud. Ocala's once favorite son is led away in handcuffs.
He was ready to fight his battle. So that just made him stronger, actually. He was ready to fight for what he thought was right.
Farkas's trial begins in April 2011. One by one, 6 co-conspirators who have cut deals for reduced sentences testify against Farkas, and prosecutors present millions of doctored loan documents as evidence. Despite all the layers of financial complexity, the trial lasts less than 3 weeks.
Taylor Bean and Whitaker was Lee Farkas, and when Taylor Bean and Whitaker fell, then Lee Farkas was going to fall.
On April 19, 2011, Farkas is found guilty of 14 counts of fraud. 6 co-conspirators are also found guilty. Their prison sentences range from 8 years to 3 months. Kathy Kissick gets 8 years for her role. Ray Bowman, who kept quiet after uncovering TBW's massive debt, gets 5 years. Jason Moore, who was never investigated for any wrongdoing, follows the trials closely.
My friends and former colleagues who are now in jail, and those of us who managed to escape, we are left feeling a profound sense of shame, but also betrayal.
Prosecutors seek the maximum sentence against Lee Farkas.
I think there's a tip-off when the prosecutors are seeking a 385-year sentence against Lee Farkas, and his attorneys were thinking more like 15 years.
But on June 30th, 2011, the judge hands down a sentence of 30 years. For Terry Huber, Farkas's sister, justice has not been served.
I see people on the news every day that have killed people, that have raped people, that have done horrible things, and they go to prison for 10 years. That was a life sentence for him.
The judge also orders that Farkas personally forfeit $38.5 million. In lieu of cash, prosecutors seize all of his assets, including his houses and vintage car collection. The number pales in comparison to the staggering amount that investors and homeowners have lost through years of Farkas's fake loan scams.
When you add up all of TBW's thefts, Lee and TBW cheated investors out of about $3 billion in total.
Back at his Miami law firm, Paul Singerman has already started proceedings against Deloitte & Touche, TBW's old accountant, who stamped healthy audit reports for years, hitting the firm with a $7.6 billion lawsuit for negligence.
Had Deloitte & Touche done what it agreed to do, which was to detect fraud, this could have ended years earlier than it did.
In a statement to American Greed, Deloitte & Touche responds that the lawsuit defies common sense and maintains that these claims are utterly without merit. The Dush family and thousands of former TBW employees are recovering, but they know too many are still suffering.
They were real people attached to those account numbers. And what was done affected real families. It really can happen to anybody, anywhere.
TBW's palatial world headquarters stands vacant. Lee Farkas sits in a jail cell at Butner Federal Penitentiary in North Carolina. Farkas is scheduled for release in 2041. He will be 88 years old.
Lee always taught me, don't be too greedy. Don't be afraid to pay people. He perhaps used our own greed to sign on for this ride. His greed, it translated into power. There's a really large senior population who are looking to build their dream homes.
Farkas thinks it's the perfect place to make a killing. He launches a construction company with his life partner Coda Robertson backing the money.
At first it did pretty well, but he started to clash with old Ocalians, the old guard here. And he was the new kid in town. He was different, he was bold, he was gay, and didn't fit the typical mold.
In sunny Ocala, residents accuse Farkas of shady business practices. Farkas soon finds he's running a failing business. Again. In late 1989, the company folds.
He racked up a ton of bills. He had judgments against him left and right. He was known as a crook.
But Farkas is about to find his calling. In 1991, he snaps up a little mortgage company called Taylor, Bean & Whitaker, or TBW, for $75,000.
He was flat broke. He actually got the money to buy the company from his partner's mother.
Farkas has no formal training in finance, but he's now running his own mortgage company. In a good month, the business closes 40 loans, but Farkas thinks he can do better.
He could leverage his quick-talking skills, his ability to think quickly on his feet.
By the late 90s, the U.S. housing market is growing rapidly, and so is the internet.
He was like a financial prophet. He predicted the whole mortgage industry was about to be broken wide open because of the internet. And he understood that those who mastered technology would be ahead of the curve when it came to originating loans.
You're selling people on loan products. Farkas had that, and he was able to make a very successful business out of it.
Farkas's salesmanship kicks into high gear. He expands TBW, opening 12 branches in 5 states. It was then that Farkas meets 28-year-old Cambridge University graduate Jason Moore at a Florida barbecue and hires him to spearhead internet innovations.
He offered me a 6-figure salary like he was handing me a pencil. I wasn't looking for a job, I wasn't qualified, but I took it.
By December 2000, TBW is processing more than 6,000 mortgages a year. And Farkas is acquiring a taste for the finer things in life. He stockpiles classic cars, a '65 Shelby Cobra, a Model A Woody. Farkas's story begins in Albuquerque, New Mexico. His sister, Terry Huber, remembers a responsible brother consumed with being respected and successful.
He was very smart as a child and always talking about business.
When his father dies, Farkas drops out of college and at 21 takes a crack at running the family insurance company.
He didn't think school was that important, and he felt he had to come back and take over my dad's business.
The family business flounders. It seems insurance isn't young Lee's forte. In the late 70s, Farkas sells the business and goes in search of his fortune.
Farkas kind of rambled from place to place. It wasn't really clear what his great ambition was going to be in life.
By the mid-1980s, Farkas lands in Ocala, Florida, a sleepy town speckled with horse farms. Gerald Ergel is the former mayor of Ocala.
Ocala is known as the horse capital of the world. The people here are some of the nicest, most congenial people that you'll ever meet.
In largely evangelical, conservative Ocala, Lee lives as an openly gay man. But residents seem kind and trusting to this businessman.
He knew that they were...
On June 24, 2010, 57-year-old Lee Bentley Farkas makes bond and walks out of a Florida jail. The once high-flying mortgage mogul is charged with engineering a series of massive frauds that have bankrupted his own company. For more than a decade, Farkas peddled fake mortgages and looted his company for tens of millions of dollars, leaving thousands of innocent homeowners to live mortgage nightmares. Jason Moore worked with Lee Farkas for 7 years.
He always said, we have to make as much money as possible right now, because this will not last forever.
Houses aren't selling, credit is scarce, and risky home loans have led to a mounting list of bankrupt mortgage companies. Reporter Nick Timmeros has covered Farkas' story for the Wall Street Journal.
He was on trial because he stole from a bank, he stole from investors. He did things that were so blatantly wrong. You cross a red line at a certain point.
Charged with 16 counts of wire, banking, and securities fraud, Farkas faces a sentence of up to 385 years. Lee Farkas a handful of investment homes and party pads from Key West to Maine. He also invests heavily in his adopted hometown, scooping up real estate and converting dilapidated buildings into TBW offices. Locals welcome him as a vital employer.
Lee's goal was to make Taylor Bean & Whitaker the largest mortgage company in the world. The jobs that they created here, that was a huge asset.
In the early 2000s, the housing market in the United States explodes.
Taylor Bean & Whitaker grew and grew and grew because this was a great time to be in the business. These were the go-go years of consumer mortgage lending.
Credit is cheap, regulations are loose, and Lee Farkas is finally successful and respected.
He said, you know what? Now is my time. I see an industry that I can sink my teeth into, and I'm going for it.
TBW is independent, a fact Farkas is fiercely proud of.
They would originate mortgages. They would get loans from other people, from banks and from other credit facilities. They would take those loans and sell them to other investors.
But being independent, TBW lacks the financial resources of big commercial banks and can't hold large amounts of loans on the books.
Taylor Bean Whitaker